Part 4, Place Names, The Name, Section 4. While I had been going up the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, Gilberte had arrived by the Rue Boissy d'Anglais, Mademoiselle having taken advantage of the fine weather to go on some errand of her own, and Monsieur Swann was coming to fetch his daughter. And so it was my fault. I ought not to have strayed from the lawn, for one never knew for certain from what direction Gilberte would appear, whether she would be early or late, and this perpetual tension succeeded in making more impressive not only the Champs-Élysées in their entirety and the whole span of the afternoon, like a vast expanse of space and time, on every point and at every moment of which it was possible that the form of Gilberte might appear, but also that form itself, since behind its appearance I felt that there lay concealed the reason for which it had shot its arrow into my heart at 4:00 instead of at 2:30, crowned with a smart hat for paying calls instead of the plain cap for games, in front of the ambassadeurs and not between the two puppet shows, I divined one of those occupations in which I might not follow Gilberte, occupations that forced her to go out or to stay at home. I was in contact with the mystery of her unknown life. It was this mystery, too, which troubled me when, running at the sharp-voiced girl's bidding, so as to begin our game without more delay, I saw Gilberte, so quick and informal with us, make a ceremonious bow to the old lady with the debates, who acknowledged it with, "What a lovely sun! You'd think there was a fire burning," speaking to her with a shy smile, with an air of constraint, which called to my mind the other little girl that Gilberte must be when at home with her parents, or with friends of her parents, paying visits, and all the rest that escaped me of her existence. But of that existence no one gave me so strong an impression as did Monsieur Swann, who came a little later to fetch his daughter. That was because he and Madame Swann, inasmuch as their daughter lived with them, as her lessons, her games, her friendships depended upon them, contained for me, like Gilberte, perhaps even more than Gilberte, as befitted subjects that had an all-powerful control over her, in whom it must have had its source, an undefined and inaccessible quality of melancholy charm. Everything that concerned them was on my part the object of so constant a preoccupation that the days on which, as on this day, Monsieur Swann, whom I had seen so often long ago, without his having aroused my curiosity, when he was still on good terms with my parents, came for Gilberte to the Champs-Élysées, once the pulsations to which my heart had been excited by the appearance of his gray hat and hooded cape had subsided, the sight of him still impressed me as might that of an historic personage, upon whom one had just been studying a series of books, and the smallest details of whose life one learned with enthusiasm. His relations with the Comte de Paris, which, when I heard them discussed at Combray, seemed to me unimportant, became now in my eyes something marvelous, as if no one else had ever known the House of Orleans. They set him in vivid detachment against the vulgar background of pedestrians of different classes, who encumbered that particular path in the Champs-Élysées, in the midst of whom I admired his condescending to figure without claiming any special deference, which, as it happened, none of them dreamed of paying him, so profound was the incognito in which he was wrapped. He responded politely to the salutations of Gilberte's companions, even to mine, for all that he was no longer on good terms with my family, but without appearing to know who I was. This reminded me that he had constantly seen me in the country, a memory which I had retained but kept out of sight, because, since I had seen Gilberte again, Swann had become to me preeminently her father, and no longer the Combray Swann. As the ideas which nowadays I made his name connote were different from the ideas in the system of which it was formerly comprised, which I utilized not at all now when I had occasion to think of him. He had become a new, another person. Still I attached him by an artificial thread, secondary and transversal to our former guest, and as nothing had any longer any value for me, save in the extent to which my love might profit by it, it was with a spasm of shame and of regret at not being able to erase them from my memory that I recaptured the years in which, in the eyes of this same Swann, who was at that moment before me in the Champs Elysees, and to whom fortunately Gilberte had perhaps not mentioned my name, I had so often in the evenings made myself ridiculous by sending to ask Mamma to come upstairs to my room to say good night to me, while she was drinking coffee with him and my father and my grandparents at the table in the garden. He told Gilberte that she might play one game; he could wait for a quarter of an hour; and sitting down, just like any one else, on an iron chair, paid for his ticket with that hand which Philippe VII had so often held in his own, while we began our game upon the lawn, scattering the pigeons, whose beautiful iridescent bodies, shaped like hearts and surely the lilacs of the feathered kingdom, took refuge, as in so many sanctuaries, one on the great basin of stone, on which its beak, as it disappeared below the rim, conferred the part, assigned the purpose of offering to the bird in abundance the fruit or grain at which it appeared to be pecking; another on the head of the statue, which it seemed to crown with one of those enameled objects, whose polychrome varies in certain classical works the monotony of the stone, and with an attribute which, when the goddess bears it, entitles her to a particular epithet, and makes of her, as a different Christian name makes of a mortal, a fresh divinity. On one of these sunny days which had not realized my hopes, I had not the courage to conceal my disappointment from Gilberte. "I had ever so many things to ask you," I said to her. "I thought that to day was going to mean so much in our friendship, and no sooner have you come than you go away. Try to come early to morrow, so that I can talk to you." Her face lighted up, and she jumped for joy as she answered, "To morrow you may make up your mind, my dear friend, I shan't come. First of all, I've a big luncheon party, then in the afternoon I am going to a friend's house to see King Theodosius arrive from her windows. Won't that be splendid? And then next day I'm going to Michel Strogoff, and after that it will soon be Christmas, and the New Year holidays. Perhaps they'll take me south to the Riviera. Won't that be nice? Though I should miss the Christmas tree here. Anyhow, if I do stay in Paris, I shan't be coming here, because I shall be out paying calls with Mamma. Good by. There's Papa calling me." I returned home with Françoise through streets that were still gay with sunshine, as on the evening of a holiday when the merriment is over. I could scarcely drag my legs along. "I'm not surprised," said Françoise. "It's not the right weather for the time of year. It's much too warm. Oh dear, oh dear! To think of all the poor sick people there must be everywhere. You would think that up there, too, everything's got out of order." I repeated to myself, stifling my sobs, the words in which Gilberte had given utterance to her joy at the prospect of not coming back, for a long time, to the Champs Elysees; but already the charm with which, by the mere act of thinking, my mind was filled as soon as it thought of her, the privileged position, unique, even if it were painful, in which I was inevitably placed in relation to Gilberte by the contraction of a scar in my mind, had begun to add to that very mark of her indifference something romantic, and in the midst of my tears my lips would shape themselves in a smile which was indeed the timid outline of a kiss. And when the time came for the postman, I said to myself, that evening as on every other, "I am going to have a letter from Gilberte. She is going to tell me at last that she has never ceased to love me, and to explain to me the mysterious reason by which she has been forced to conceal her love from me until now, to put on the appearance of being able to be happy without seeing me, the reason for which she has assumed the form of the other Gilberte, who is simply a companion." Every evening I would beguile myself into imagining this letter, believing that I was actually reading it, reciting each of its sentences in turn. Suddenly I would stop in alarm. I had realized that, if I was to receive a letter from Gilberte, it could not in any case be this letter, since it was I myself who had just composed it; and from that moment I would strive to keep my thoughts clear of the words which I should have liked her to write to me, from fear lest, by first selecting them myself, I should be excluding just those identical words, the dearest, the most desired, from the field of possible events, even if, by an almost impossible coincidence, it had been precisely the letter of my invention that Gilberte had addressed to me of her own accord. Recognizing my own work in it, I should not have had the impression that I was receiving something that had not originated in myself, something real, something new, a happiness external to my mind, independent of my will, a gift indeed from love. While I waited, I read over again a page which, although it had not been written to me by Gilberte, came to me none the less from her. That page by Bergotte upon the beauty of the old myths from which Racine drew his inspiration, which, with the agate marble, I always kept within reach. I was touched by my friend's kindness in having procured the book for me, and as every one is obliged to find some reason for his passion, so much so that he is glad to find in the creature whom he loves qualities which, he has learned by reading or in conversation, are worthy to excite a man's love, that he assimilates them by imitation, and makes out of them fresh reasons for his love, even although these qualities be diametrically opposed to those for which his love would have sought so long as it was spontaneous, as Swann, before my day, had sought to establish the aesthetic basis of Odette's beauty. I, who had at first loved Gilberte in Combray days, on account of all the unknown element in her life into which I would fain have plunged headlong, have undergone reincarnation, discarding my own separate existence as a thing that no longer mattered, I thought now, as of an inestimable advantage, that of this, my own, my too familiar, my contemptible existence, Gilberte might one day become the humble servant, the kindly, the comforting collaborator, who in the evenings, helping me in my work, would collate for me the texts of rare pamphlets. As for Bergotte, that infinitely wise, almost divine old man, because of whom I had first, before I had ever seen her, loved Gilberte, now it was for Gilberte's sake, chiefly, that I loved him. With as much pleasure as the pages that he had written about Racine, I studied the wrapper, folded under great seals of white wax, and tied with billows of pink ribbon, in which she had brought those pages to me. I kissed the agate marble, which was the better part of my love's heart, the part that was not frivolous but faithful, and, for all that it was adorned with the mysterious charm of Gilberte's life, dwelt close beside me, inhabited my chamber, shared my bed. But the beauty of that stone, and the beauty also of those pages of Bergotte, which I was glad to associate with the idea of my love for Gilberte, as if, in the moments when my love seemed no longer to have any existence, they gave it a kind of consistency, were, I perceived, anterior to that love, which they in no way resembled, their elements had been determined by the writer's talent or by geological laws, before ever Gilberte had known me. Nothing in book or stone would have been different if Gilberte had not loved me, and there was nothing, consequently, that authorized me to read in them a message of happiness. And while my love, incessantly waiting for the morrow to bring a confession of Gilberte's love for me, destroyed, unraveled every evening the ill-done work of the day, in some shadowed part of my being was an unknown weaver who would not leave where they lay the severed threads, but collected and rearranged them, without any thought of pleasing me, or of toiling for my advantage, in the different order which she gave to all her handiwork. Without any special interest in my love, not beginning by deciding that I was loved, she placed, side by side, those of Gilberte's actions that had seemed to me inexplicable, and her faults which I had excused. Then, one with another, they took on a meaning. It seemed to tell me, this new arrangement, that when I saw Gilberte, instead of coming to me in the Champs Elysees, going to a party, or on errands with her governess, when I saw her prepared for an absence that would extend over the New Year holidays, I was wrong in thinking, in saying, it is because she is frivolous, or easily led. For she would have ceased to be either if she had loved me, and if she had been forced to obey, it would have been with the same despair in her heart that I felt on the days when I did not see her. It showed me further, this new arrangement, that I ought, after all, to know what it was to love, since I loved Gilberte. It drew my attention to the constant anxiety that I had to show off before her, by reason of which I tried to persuade my mother to get for Françoise a waterproof coat and a hat with a blue feather, or, better still, to stop sending with me to the Champs Elysees an attendant with whom I blushed to be seen, to all of which my mother replied that I was not fair to Françoise, that she was an excellent woman and devoted to us all, and also that sole exclusive need to see Gilberte, the result of which was that, months in advance, I could think of nothing but how to find out at what date she would be leaving Paris, and where she was going, feeling that the most attractive country in the world would be but a place of exile if she were not to be there, and asking only to be allowed to stay forever in Paris, so long as I might see her in the Champs Elysees. And it had little difficulty in making me see that neither my anxiety nor my need could be justified by anything in Gilberte's conduct. She, on the contrary, was genuinely fond of her governess, without troubling herself over what I might choose to think about it. It seemed quite natural to her not to come to the Champs Elysees if she had to go shopping with Mademoiselle; delightful if she had to go out somewhere with her mother. And even supposing that she would ever have allowed me to spend my holidays in the same place as herself, when it came to choosing that place she considered her parents' wishes, 1,000 different amusements of which she had been told, and not at all that it should be the place to which my family were proposing to send me. When she assured me, as sometimes happened, that she liked me less than some other of her friends, less than she had liked me the day before, because by my clumsiness I had made her side lose a game, I would beg her pardon. I would beg her to tell me what I must do in order that she should begin again to like me as much as, or more than, the rest. I hoped to hear her say that that was already my position. I besought her, as though she had been able to modify her affection for me as she or I chose, to give me pleasure, merely by the words that she would utter, as my good or bad conduct should deserve. Was I then not yet aware that what I felt, myself, for her, depended neither upon her actions nor upon my desires? It showed me finally the new arrangement planned by my unseen weaver, that if we find ourselves hoping that the actions of a person who has hitherto caused us anxiety may prove not to have been sincere, they shed in their wake a light which our hopes are powerless to extinguish, a light to which, rather than to our hopes, we must put the question, what will be that person's actions on the morrow? These new counsels, my love listened and heard them. They persuaded it that the morrow would not be different from all the days that had gone before; that Gilberte's feeling for me, too long established now to be capable of alteration, was indifference; that in my friendship with Gilberte it was I alone who loved. "That is true," my love responded. "There is nothing more to be made of that friendship. It will not alter now." And so the very next day, unless I were to wait for a public holiday, if there was one approaching, some anniversary, the New Year, perhaps, one of those days which are not like other days, on which time starts afresh, casting aside the heritage of the past, declining its legacy of sorrows, I would appeal to Gilberte to terminate our old and to join me in laying the foundations of a new friendship. End of Part 4, Section 4.